Welcome to Grid Talk. My name is Ruby Price, and today we're here to review the 2025 Formula One preseason testing. Joining me, we have a full house of Grid Talk. George Howson,
Afternoon.
Owain Medford,
Hello.
and Louis Edwards.
Evening.
Good afternoon, evening, and goodbye. But yeah, before we get into this episode, we must thank our sponsor for this episode, Bet Online. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, Bet Online is your ultimate game day companion. With the largest selection of odds on everything from NBA and college basketball to the NHL and UFC, BetOnline continues to be your number one betting source. From every three-pointer to hat trick, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. So we've had 24 hours of running in Bahrain before the 2025 season can get underway. Nearly 4,000 laps of the international circuit at Sakhir with a multitude of different running plans. The first question really is why? What's the point, George?
Why do we do this? Why do we go to all this trouble of testing Formula One cars? Well, it's to see if they work. It's to see if all the upgrades that they've been working on, because even though we've been in the off season, as it were, the teams have been very much hard at work trying to improve their cars, trying new aerodynamic packages. The engine suppliers have been trying upgrades to their engines. Pirelli have been working on the tires, of course, as well, always trying to improve them. Basically, yeah, they've been doing their work outside of the track. They've been trying to improve the cars, and they have things such as simulators, which are of course very good to try and determine whether these parts will work or not. They've got things like wind tunnel time, although that is of course limited depending on how much how successful they were in the previous season. And on top of that as well, they've got all that stuff, but at the end of the day, they don't know whether it's going to work or not out on the track. And same for the drivers as well. They don't know how the cars are going to feel until they actually get in them and drive around the track for the first time. We've seen little snippets of, Ferrari in particular, with Hamilton driving around Fiorano. A lot of that time is in old cars. This is the first time they've got the 2025 cars on the track to see if they work and to see if there's any problems with them. And yeah, thousands upon thousands of kilometers of running several times a race distance to determine whether these parts work or not. So basically, it's just to see if what they have been working on is good or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've seen many times in recent seasons teams bringing upgrades to tracks and then it not having the expected, final say ultimately of the performance that they were expecting it to bring. That's kind of where testing, has its strengths of, hey, we've been working all winter on a car. Is it going to work? But yeah, as I say, nearly 4,000 laps into around Bahrain from all the 10 Formula One teams across 3 days. That's 24 hours of testing split across 6 sessions, thousands of miles. In the last few seasons, some of the more thrilling, let's say, Grand Prix came from where there were more question marks going into the weekend. But I guess what I'm really asking, Owain, is do we need as much testing as we have?
Um, I think it's a difficult question to answer because currently, no. Um, with the rule set that we have now, is that obviously the last generation of the last year of this generation of cars, both in terms of the power units and the mechanical, like the aerodynamic and mechanical design of the cars currently. And if you look back through testing over the years, we now have obviously the lowest amount of testing. That the teams can do. Obviously, it changed a bit in 2008, I believe, with the removal of in-season testing for the teams. Because otherwise, if you look at it, the pre-season testing doesn't matter as much. But this is the only time that teams get to test the cars. So what we're seeing now is you see quite a dynamic allocation of testing where. We had 12 days in 2014 and 15 with these very new, at the time, hybrid power units. And obviously, as they've matured, and the formula for the mechanical platform of the cars and the aerodynamic platform of the cars has actually reduced, or it's reduced over time, sort of down to 8 days and then 6 days in 2020, then down to 3 days in 2021. That was the last year of those cars, obviously. And then back when we had the new, we had these ground effect cars coming in, it shot up again to 6 days, including the sort of pre-season session, which wasn't technically a test, just to sort of, I think, save the embarrassment of the teams. And I think this is something that we got to expect going forward. I mean, I'm basically assuming that next year's test in 2026 will be with the brand new engine formula. As much as it's not entirely new, but we have had a sort of reconfiguring of the of the hybrid and ICE parts of the power unit. So I can imagine that this there's going to be teething trouble. I mean, there was teething trouble for this test for a lot of teams. The standard stuff, water leaks and things like that. But and it's been a lot more reliable this year than it has in many previous years. I don't think we saw a single car stopped out on track, for example, for any kind of mechanical malfunction. So I think to answer your question, it depends. I mean, like I say, we're at a very mature point in the rule cycle, and it means that we don't need that much testing. But comparatively, when we shake everything up every few years, as we like to do in Formula One, the testing has to go up. Otherwise, you are going to get teams running. You're going to get 3 or 4 teams at the first race. Finding mechanical problems, having had basically no time to actually to test these things out. So yeah, I mean, we have about probably the right amount now, but we're going to have to increase that depending on how much we change, just so that teams actually have the sort of right amount to test everything out and get through all of the issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, the cars at the moment have got such levels of reliability. We're not really stress testing them anymore because the teams are running all of those in terms of like, simulations and statistics. They know essentially where the limits of the car are. So then they just drive about 5% lower than that. And then they never almost really find that they're pushing the technology that they've got. The most recent example really I can think of would be McLaren with that god awful Honda engine, where they were struggling to make maybe even like 7 consecutive laps in pre-season testing. We had teams, pretty much almost every team, apart from Aston Martin, hitting 100 laps on the first day. That's a monumental spike in reliability, really, and obviously there's so much data involved. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this year though, given that we're not doing preseason testing at the opening round of the Formula One calendar. So at the very least, the teams haven't just spent 24 hours figuring out data about the next race. But I'm sure they will find plenty of opportunities to do so. But Louis, with all of this in mind, is there anything really you think could be changed or like should be added about a preseason testing period?
I mean, it's in terms of anything that changes, not really, because it's just an open test. The teams can go there and pretty much do whatever they want to. Theoretically, they can go and fit a ton of illegal parts to the car, drive it around, new track record, and then not do anything for 2 days. That's well within their prerogative to do that if they want to. But the only thing, if you're going to think of something to change, is going to be either how much time the teams are allowed on track, a cap on mileage or a cap on like something, kind of how many runs they can do. Um, but I think we've hit a point now, and I think you get there as kind of Owain mentions, like when she starts to like get into a 3 or 4 years into a regulations, testing becomes a formality. Teams will want to just get out there, just run the car, just allow the drivers more than anything really to get to grips, especially this year when you've got so many rookies. This is the best opportunity to get them out there, get them acclimated, and just get them to run as many laps as they can. The fun comes when there's a new regulation change. So, for example, next year will be quite fun because there's actually something to look forward to. These cars are brand new. There's new engines. There's new teething troubles that, like you mentioned with the McLaren Honda, like when we saw these new V6s and Honda came with theirs and it was catastrophically awful, it was exciting because we were like, oh, how many laps until the McLaren Honda goes bang today? Or how many laps are they not going to do today? So in terms of any changes, not really, just because it's, as I said, it's just an open thing. Testing is definitely something we need, and the teams will be very angry if they don't, especially with the lack of the season testing. Yeah, the only things I could imagine that you could add is a cap, but that would be pointless.
Yeah, definitely. We don't want a sort of limit on what they can actually do during those sessions, just give them the sessions and let them do what they want ultimately, because, each team has their own run plans. We've seen between 2024 and 2025, some of these cars are a bit more of an evolution on the 2024 cars, whereas some of them are more of a revolution than the 2024 cars. Williams, for example, bringing what looks to be more of an upgraded 2024 car to 2025 versus Ferrari, who look to be bringing more of a newer challenger to 2025, for example. But of course, we do need to be mindful that it is only testing. As I say, lots of different run plans being done for lots of different agendas. It's unlikely we'll see the true performance of any of the teams until potentially as late as qualifying in Australia in just a few weeks' time. But from what we have seen, George, who looks like they've had a good season test? Who's starting 2025 on the strongest foot?
It depends how you look at it at the end of the day. I mean, if you look at the total amount of laps that these guys have done, it's quite tight at the top between three different teams. Mercedes, Haas, and the Racing Bulls have all done over 450 laps, and the next after that is Alpine at just over 400. So if you look at it from that point of view, they've done a lot of testing, they've done a lot of data gathering with that, which is positive. On the flip side of things, surprisingly, it's Aston Martin and Red Bull, significantly less than anybody else. They're just over 300, and then it's Sauber on just over 350 laps in total. But like we mentioned earlier on, that is still a gargantuan amount of laps. That is a lot of testing, even for the teams that have done less. So I wouldn't read too much into that. So the reliability in general is unbelievable right now. I mean, we saw probably 5 or so races last year where everybody who started finished. We're going to get the same this year, if not even higher. It's not going to be uncommon for all 20 cars to finish the race. And any kind of mechanical failure, I think, is going to be quite rare. You're only going to see people dropping out because of collision damage or maybe a puncture or something like that. There is an interesting stat I found here as well in terms of the overall fastest times. And again, it is testing. You can't say that this is definitely 100% what's going to happen, because we've seen, for example, I would definitely put the team that improved the most in terms of their overall lap time being Alpine. They managed to do a lap time that was 2 seconds faster than what they did in pre-season testing last year. But if any team needs a bit of good PR, it is somebody like Alpine. So if you're thinking cynically, which I am in their case, they've done that lap just to show that they are fast, and then they get to Melbourne and maybe they're not quite as fast. It's still a good sign, of course, but overall, I wouldn't read too much into that. Williams about 1.6 faster, then you've got Red Bull and McLaren about a second faster. Racing Bulls, you're talking less than half a second for them, and Sauber as well. So it all depends on how you look at it. I personally, and I've said this for quite some time, I would put 3 teams really in that top echelon of being able to challenge for the Constructors' Championship. You've got Red Bull and Ferrari. I don't think Mercedes will quite be there. I think Mercedes are probably going to get the odd win here and there. The tracks will suit their car in some conditions, cold conditions, like we've seen in Bahrain, surprisingly. We've gone to the middle of the desert and it's rained and it's been cold. Who would have predicted that? So basically, that's my kind of best guess. But like you said, we're not going to know truly until we get into the first qualifying in Melbourne, when it really matters.
Yeah, definitely. And, the fact that we had teams actually bringing inters and wets to the Bahrain preseason test, we were making jokes about that before preseason testing actually started. And then we had rain. It was insane. How often do we get to see teams in a desert running wet condition tires? It's mad. But Owain, what about yourself? Like, who do you think's really had like a good preseason test? Like as George said, Haas have had a lot of laps there. They're the second highest amount of laps gathered from teams, but at the same time, we never once really saw them running quick laps. They were always about 4 or 5 seconds off the pace.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would caution everything in testing is that you don't particularly, or you kind of almost don't want to see quick laps. I mean, you get the GPS data, and it's very easy to tell when someone's just taken a load of fuel out the car and gone for a glory run. And testing is not, it's maybe more so about it right now, as I say, with this sort of mature rules package that we have. But a lot of the time, you just want to look at kilometers. And from that perspective, someone like the Racing Bulls have had a great test. They had really smooth running, and they're sort of probably bottom of the midfield. But the fact that they've had a great test compared to how bad they were last year, and the issues that they had during the season, it's great for them to just to be able to put lap times down, put the run plan together. And speed is not necessarily what you're looking for. You're looking for kilometers. I mean, generally, I would say that McLaren are probably just about at the top. Red Bull still seem to be struggling a little bit, and they claim that they've got a lot of work to do. So they, I mean, I'm not going to completely discount them, but it's probably a bit sort of nebulous between, who's second or third. I mean, I'd probably still put Red Bull second. I mean, they were, obviously they fell off last year, but and they didn't seem amazing this year, but in at least in testing, but they're probably about second. Ferrari have obviously had a fairly good test. I mean, there's still issues there, and Mercedes do seem like that step behind, or hopefully they'll get more consistent. I mean, Aston Martin has obviously had an awful test by comparison. They've really struggled. But by comparison, also Williams have had a good test. So I think we're looking for a shake-up in the order a little bit. I mean, we're kind of expecting with this season to have kind of a fair amount of continuity as the teams coalesce. But it does seem that they've diverged a little bit as we saw last year. But hopefully, the sort of divergence that we've seen and the shake-up that we've seen won't be so drastic as it was last year, and it will sort of come back together during the season more quickly, and we should have a better season because of that. That's my hope out of it.
Yeah, definitely. Louis, so we've been talking about who's been having great preseason testings, who's been having good ones. Obviously, I don't really think anybody had a catastrophic preseason test this season, but, is there a team you think didn't have a particularly great time over the last few days in Bahrain?
Yeah, unfortunately, gone are the days of teams showing up late or going bang. It's kind of the unfortunate side effect of reliability these days, and teams being uh, generally run by competent people. So yeah, you can't say anyone had like a bad test. You can only say that a team had a worse test than another team, really. And the two that I kind of look at in terms of having a bad test are like Sauber and Aston Martin. They're kind of my two kind of choices. Sauber, I mean, we kind of expected them to be slow. They're not a team that is really concentrating about evolution and revolution. The Sauber is very much just an evolution of 2024. It's just going to be slow. It was slow. Nico Hulkenberg, he's been getting used to his new car, and he's not particularly happy with it. And he's like, well, we're going to have some struggles. I think he knew that when he signed the contract, to be completely honest. It's not like horrifically slow, but I think we are just going to expect more of the same from Sauber. It's going to be at the back. They're not really going to try and push forward. All the effort is going to go into next year's car. And Aston Martin, yeah, I'm not looking at times, but in terms of laps and actually, kilometers driven, as Owain mentioned, they only had 306 laps only, which is relatively fewer than the rest of the teams. Lance Stroll didn't get as much run time as he had hoped. He had some sort of bug or some sort of illness on the Friday morning, which meant they had a driver who could give useful feedback in the car, which was probably maybe that wasn't so bad for Aston Martin. But the car is not great. We saw it sort of towards the end of last season that the Aston Martin was kind of slipping back, and I think that's kind of where they're expecting to be. I think they probably have fallen behind the likes of the Alpine, probably very solidly behind the Williams now, which is not a great place to be considering these are teams that they're on the up. They're not on a bit of a slump, so I think it's going to be a difficult fight back for Aston Martin. I think they would have hoped to have kicked off with a better car. Of course, people are like, "Oh, this is Adrian Newey's first." It is an Adrian Newey's first car. We've got to wait another season before we get a true Adrian Newey Aston Martin, and this is just going to be a year where they try and make it through, try and develop the car, do what they can, but like Sauber, 2026 is more of a focus.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the Adrian Newey point as well, he's still on gardening leave at this current point, so obviously can't work on anything for the current 2025 Aston Martin at the moment, but there's nothing to say that, once he's actually in his position, whilst his main focus is going to be 2026, putting Aston Martin up towards the front, if not the front of the field, he might decide, oh, actually, maybe we need a bit of momentum coming from 2025 as well. But George, I wanted to touch on obviously what Louis mentioned, Lance Stroll having to sort of step away from the Aston Martin role, like due to a bug. Apparently, Fernando Alonso wasn't feeling particularly brilliant as well at the same time. So a lot seemingly going around in Aston Martin, not just green for the car, green for, a bit of illness or something along those lines. But that disrupted running. Obviously, they come into preseason testing with gameplay, come into preseason testing, with is what we want to get out of it. And when you have a driver not in the car and you have to make changes like that, how much of an impact does it have? And, is this something we could see having a longer term impact into the start of Aston Martin's season?
When it rains, it pours at Aston Martin. Unfortunately, they had such a dismal last season. It didn't start out particularly great, but it just got worse for them. And they would have been hoping that they can come into this year and they've got all, like you said, they've got all these plans, all this preparation, and as good of a driver as if they put, for example, Felipe Drugovich in the car, who was of course a very competent driver. I would argue definitely more competent than one of their all season drivers. And I don't think that's a controversial opinion at all. As good as he is not the guy that's going to be driving the car throughout the year. They need Alonso and Stroll's input to be able to make a car that suits them and that they can drive consistently and confidently. So it's a massive impact on them. It really, really is. I mean, we all know what it's like. We've all been ill and worked, and it's difficult. You're never 100%, but, we're doing it in an office or whatever kind of relatively physically low stress environment this is. They're going around Bahrain at 200 miles an hour, being thrown around in these cars and in difficult conditions as well, cold conditions, which, makes it even tougher to get the temperatures in the brakes and the tires and everything. So it really, really impacts. I mean, I've said a few times that I feel honestly that this preseason testing, in a sense, is going to be a little unrepresentative because of how cold it was. We're not going to see these conditions repeated throughout the vast majority of the rest of the season, unless maybe it's a cold weekend at Spa or Silverstone or probably Las Vegas towards the end of the year. But the vast majority of the season is going to be running different temperatures. So I think all the teams are going to be a little impacted by that. But yeah, but for Aston Martin, both of their drivers being not in the best condition like that, it's not good. I mean, if anybody can power is Fernando Alonso, of course, revealed after the end of last season that the guy had been carrying a shoulder injury or an elbow injury or something like that, and he'd still been out there racing like the warrior he is. So if anybody can get on with it, it's him. But it's suboptimal, to put it politely, I would say, for Aston Martin.
Suboptimal, absolutely. And, Fernando Alonso carrying the Aston Martin team throughout 2024, of course, there was going to be health repercussions on his back. It's the biggest weight of 2024, really. Even when teams are struggling with weight issues. So we've had 24 hours of track time, and we've had a few different sort of threads to pull on so far during the show. But what have we really learned from that track time? Like, are there any particular points about teams that you want to mention in this current era?
I think I have to say how McLaren looks like they've picked up where they left off, and they do again look like the team to beat. And obviously they won the constructors, and assuming things go well, I mean, I can't foresee any other team sort of being able to get near them, at least in the early part of the season. Obviously, we're going to a slightly different track in Australia, and then a whole host of different tracks, in the early sort of sections of the season. But the car just looks really planted. When they take the fuel out, as we saw at times, they do just look like they have the ability to turn on lap time, and the front end does exactly what they want, and the rear end's not moving about. By comparison, we didn't necessarily see that so much with things like the Red Bull at times. It looked a bit spiky on occasion. I mean, there were times when the Red Bull did as well. When the McLaren did as well, sorry. But I think the on that second day, to just chuck the car about, put it where he wanted it on the fast laps, and have the car just work, just go forward, I think really helped. I think, also Ferrari, they don't maybe look as performant as Red Bull necessarily, but they have had a good test. They've 100% had a good test, and they look like, I think they're going to be on their day, and I think that'll be quite a few days over the season. I think they're going to be troubling Red Bull. Then it's not going to be a case, I think, for Red Bull as fast as they are, that they're sort of fighting with McLaren, but it doesn't matter too much. I think they're going to have people nipping on their heels, and hopefully, I mean, Mercedes seem to have fixed some things, but Mercedes do seem to be just sort of widening the performance window of their car, which hopefully should mean that they're more competitive more of the time, and that only bodes well, bearing in mind how good they were last year. Obviously, there's the rookie that they have in Kimi Antonelli, but the hope is that he puts together. I mean, he was sort of he spun a few times, but my hope is that he's sort of getting that out of his system now, and doesn't do that in races and things like that. Give him more time, and he's going to be better. We can hopefully see what a talent he's supposed to be. But that's sort of where I'd see it at the front, in terms of performance. Yeah, that's really what I'd pick out. I mean, I don't really want to talk too much about or rag on, more specifically criticize the teams that haven't had such a great test. But yeah, really at the front, I think it's starting to come together, and I think we're going to have a good season.
Yeah, certainly some things that I picked out as well. Like Mercedes finishing day three with the fastest time, but then you've got Antonelli who still looks a little bit rough around the edges almost every single time. The coverage seemed to cut to him. He either seemed to be locking up or going deep into a corner. But Louis, is there anything else that you've learned from the last 24 hours of Bahrain testing?
Um, I mean, I pretty much agree with like pretty much everything Owain said. It does seem to be that the it's going to be probably similar to last year in terms of grid placement. Maybe we'll see the Aston, as I said, the Aston Martin. Maybe Williams, I think, will be a bit higher. And maybe the Red Bull being a little lower, at least to begin with. I don't think it's going to be a season long thing. It's Red Bull. They have plenty of money and resources to throw at issues and try and make their car faster. They went through a big slump sort of mid-season last year, but they still managed to recover, and Max Verstappen still managed to get wins despite the fact it wasn't the best car. But yeah, I think it would be naive to think that it wouldn't be the McLaren, the Ferrari at the front, with the kind of the Sauber at the back. It's not going to be some big change. It's the season before a big regulation change. Teams are not going all out for this. They know there's a huge opportunity to be had next year if they get ahead. And ultimately, finishing lower down in the championship this year gives you more wind tunnel time. It gives you more testing time. So it's not the worst thing to not win the Constructors' Championship next year, even though I'm sure the prize money is probably also worth it. But yeah, I think it's just generally naive to think that there's going to be this huge shakeup. I think it's going to be close. Don't get me wrong. I definitely think it's going to be a close battle. I think it will be the McLarens leading the way, with the Ferraris and the Mercedes very close behind, especially as Antonelli gets more equipped with the car. I think he'll get faster. He always generally has pretty slow starts. He's not someone who kind of hits the ground running in any new series. He usually tends to take a little bit of time before we start seeing the absolute magic, which is his driving ability, because there's no doubt in it that he's fast, and we will see it eventually, but we may not see it in Melbourne. We may not see it kind of in those opening 4 or 5 rounds, but as the season goes on, I think that Mercedes will not only be very competitive, but I think we'll have like 3 teams, well, 3, maybe the Red Bulls as well, but 3 teams with huge potential to make it great, with 3 driver lineups, which are epic.
Following on from that then, George, do you similarly agree? How's your kind of running order shaping up? Is it similar to what Owain and Louis have said, of McLaren leading the way, Ferrari potentially on their day and not necessarily in recovery mode, but recovering from 2024 and a suboptimal Mexican driver?
A suboptimal Mexican driver. In it's a very suboptimal car as well. I mean, Dr. Helmut Marko, you have to take his words with many, many pinches of salt, but he does say the problems from 2024 have now been fixed. I think they were at least partly fixed last season towards the end, to be honest. I kind of alluded to it before. I think in a battle for the constructors, I think it's going to be between 3 of them in terms of McLaren, Red Bull, and Ferrari. I do think in terms of a drivers' championship battle, I think there's going to be the 2 drivers from McLaren and Ferrari in there. As much as I like Liam Lawson, I do not expect him to be challenging for the championship. That is too much in what is his first full season. But in the hands of Max Verstappen, that Red Bull at times, even when it's not the fastest car, like Lewis said, it can still be a winning car. And yeah, I'm very excited to see what some of these rookies can do. I'm really excited to see what Kimi Antonelli will do. I hope it's just, given time. That's the thing. He just needs time to breathe and get used to the sport because he's 18 years old. People will quickly forget that, I'm sure, when they see how quick he is. But yeah, he's only 18 years old. So I would expect those three teams to be up there. I mean, I wouldn't completely rule out Mercedes, but I think overall, over the course of a season, I think it's asking a hell of a lot because we've got the big regulation change coming in 26. All the resources are going to be on that pretty early on in the season, if not even already now for some teams. It does look pretty bad for Aston Martin, though. I mean, they ended last year, in Alonso's words, as the ninth fastest team on the grid, and it's quite difficult to argue against the fact that they might still be down there. I'd like to see Haas climb the order a bit. I would love to see them do well. They've got an all changed lineup of like quite a few teams, have in fairness. So I really like Ollie Behrman. I'm not so much of a fan of everyone, but I think in Behrman's hand, I think they can do something. And just from a purely aesthetics point of view, like I wasn't on the livery review episode, but I'd love to see the Racing Bulls do well because that car looks incredible. But I don't think they're going to have that great of a season. Although I can see Sonoda having his day every now and again. He's good for it. So it should be very competitive. That's what I'm getting at. Everybody's got a chance at the end of the day. And I think it's just going to close up even more than what it did in 24.
Yeah, 9 teams with the chance of winning in 2025. And of course, I'm obviously not talking about Red Bull being, no, it's Sauber that are probably so far. Something monumental, I think, would have to happen for Sauber to be in the picture for a race victory in 2025. I'm not going to stake a podcast bet on it though, because I can guarantee that will happen. I think both me and George know that will happen, from previous episodes of Grid Talk. Um, we don't want to see it. We don't want to see it in 2025. But yeah, so that's kind of pre-season testing wrapped up. If you were watching it at home, let us know what you thought. Get in touch, leave a comment, all that jazz. If people want to hear more from anybody else, is there anything you want to plug at this opportunity, George?
Yeah, sure. So if people want to hear more from me, I'm over on the F1 Chronicle speaking a lot about Formula One. I'll be doing a video that go out tonight as we record this. Probably already be out by the time this pod goes out. Just going over what my thoughts are for the pecking order for F1. But in general, we react to all the news and happenings and gossip and going ons in Formula One. If you want to hear more from me, you can go over and do that. And yeah, I've won quite a few of these grid talks as well, and I'm sure we'll get on to the quiz show that is currently ongoing as well right now.
Yeah, I would normally follow through to Owain based on how my screen is laid out, but following on from that perfectly lined up seg from George there, Louis, is there anything you'd like to plug at this opportunity?
Yes, by a matter of fact, there is. The quiz show that George alluded to, Grill the Grid Talk, which the first 2 episodes are now out. If you want to test your knowledge of Formula One against the hosts, round 3 is being edited as we speak. Well, finished editing as we speak. This is George's face. So I would love for you to check that out.
Would help if I wasn't muted when I'm trying to respond. Yeah, I had a lot of fun doing the grid talk. It's been a lot of fun, like seeing the reactions to that, and seeing our reactions on our faces when we inevitably mess up. Particularly some iconic drivers' career paths for sure. Owain, is there anything you want to plug at this opportunity?
Only our social channels. If you'd like to interact with us, which I would highly suggest you do, particularly when it comes to telling us how, well, I'm just going to speak for myself here, how completely moronic you end up in Grill the Grid Talk. Yeah. If you'd like to interact with us, or say how you've done when you're watching Grow the Grid Talk, or anything that we do this year, make sure to interact with us on our social channels. That's at Grid Talk UK on all of the social media services with the app, particularly Blue Sky. That's a big one for us right now, and we're enjoying it. And come over. It's like Twitter, but good. No, at Grid Talk UK on all the social media platforms with the app.
Yeah, and if you want to hear anything more from me, I'm at Ruby Rose Price on Instagram and Threads, and I'm at Rubes on Blue Sky. But Grid Talk is available on YouTube, where most of our race episodes are recorded live, as well as Amazon Fire, Spotify, Apple Music, Verbal, and Pocket Casts. Just search Formula One Grid Talk for our back catalogue of shows with previews and reactions to the race results. Thank you to Jared Bradley and Holly Eagle for supporting supporting us on Patreon. If you want to support the show further, why not sign up to our Patreon for exclusive content, including a Beyond the Grid Talk podcast, a Patreon exclusive podcast brought to you by our Grid Talk host. And also make sure you obviously subscribe to our main channel so you're the first to know when each new episode is released. We'll be back soon with plenty more Formula One content. Thank you very much for listening to the Grid Talk podcast presented by Bet Online, and goodbye.